Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Joining us here on the program today is author of the book, The Touch, Healing Miracles and Methods. Our guest started out as an actor where his credits go all the way back to the original Twilight Zone series. But through a series of things that occurred in his lifetime, he found that he went and shifted into a whole different direction. He's going to be talking today with us about a wellspring of radiant healing energy that is located within each of us that can be accessed and channeled and used for personal healing and facilitating healing in others. We're going to learn about the practice of what is known as RAM, which is known as Radiance Aesthesia Method. It's a powerful approach to healing created and developed from a synthesis of interwoven principles from many different disciplines from around the world. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mr. Doug Hayes. Doug, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
It's good to be here, Daniel. Thank you.
Now let's talk about how all of these things came together to bring you to where you are today.
Well, it all began, I was working as a ski patroller in Snow Summit in Southern California, and it was a snowy morning. I was doing a hill check coming down the hill, and came through an area where we had the snow guns on our snowmaking equipment, and just as I was about to turn out of that area, my skis ran across a berm of snow from one of the snow guns, and when it first comes out of the guns, it's really wet and heavy and sticky, and well, my skis just froze up dead, and I kept going and executed a perfect pile driver right into the ground head first. Instantly, it was as though my body and soul had just blown apart. I felt like confetti in the wind, and I felt myself tumbling through space, but not much else, and finally came to rest face down, facing back up the hill, kind of spread-eagled on the ground. And at this point, my screen is completely white. There is no chorus of angels or no heavenly choir singing me home, just white, and I don't know for how long. Sooner or later, I begin to sort of come back into waking consciousness, and I look up the hill, and I see my dad standing there. Now, that was kind of an unusual sight because my dad had been dead for 7 years. And also was not a skier. This was not his home court, you might say. And I looked at him, and he did not look ethereal or ghostly or, woo-woo at all. I mean, he was just standing there wearing his old brown pants and his yellow members-only windbreaker. And the words came out of my mouth. I wasn't actually breathing or feeling or had no sensation or movement below the neck. But the words came out of my mouth, "What do I do now?" And he looked at me and said, "Just breathe." And as I looked down, I noticed that my chest was beginning to rise and fall on its own. And I was taking my first breaths of air again. And this was not of my own volition. This was, shall I say, a gift. Moving forward, the guys started to show up to handle my incident. And the guys that showed up were 6 men. We might have 150 patrollers associated with our hill, of which we might have 30 or 35 on a busy weekend day. This was Valentine's Day weekend in 2000, 16 years ago. And let me put this a little in context for you. These guys were all devout Christian men. Now, let me say that I don't identify as a member of any particular faith. I have a very wide-ranging, inclusive approach to spirituality and devotional practice. But it is authentic to say that all these guys were devout Christian men deeply involved with their faith. One of them was a minister, 2 of them were his deacons, and the other 3 guys, besides being top-drawer patrollers and paramedics, were deeply involved with their faith and specifically with healing within their own tradition. They asked me the usual questions, established my level of consciousness, and we're getting to the point in the scenario where it's time to roll me over onto the backboard for the ride down the hill. At this point, as they rolled me over, this is no exaggeration, the clouds actually parted overhead, and a diagonal shaft of sunlight illuminated the entire scene. And at that point, the boys went off book. When I say that, they did something that's not in our patrol manuals anywhere. I know I've been back and checked several editions, and it's not there. They put their hands on me, and they prayed. And what they prayed was that I would be healed, that my healing would forever be a demonstration of God's love, compassion, and will for me in my life and in this world, and that I would forever be a witness to that. As they were praying, all my fear just vanished. I recognized immediately that something bigger than I was taking place, and that I only had a part to play in whatever this was, and I signed a contract, you might say, at that moment, that whatever my part was to be, I was willing to play it no matter what. They got me off the hill, down to Big Bear Community Hospital. We couldn't fly out, which would have been the normal method to get me out of there, someone in my condition. And I spent 7 hours at the local hospital. Now, this is the hospital that sees all of the major trauma cases that come off our two mountains in Big Bear. So on a busy weekend day, we might have 17,000 people spread between both mountains. The doc, did his tests and took the MRIs, and they took really good care of me there, and came back and said, look, I know that I can be straight with you. You have, short of a fatality, the worst injury I have ever seen come off of these mountains. You have a 3-level spinal cord contusion with incomplete quadriplegia and deep cord syndrome. Now that's a mouthful way of saying I was really, really messed up. And he said it is a coin flip, that's a medical term, a coin flip, whether or not you'll ever be able to walk again. And I looked at him, sure in the knowledge that I was being cared for by a power greater than our local emergency room doc. And I said, Doc, you have no idea who you're dealing with. Ambulance showed up. Paramedics took me down to Loma Linda Hospital in Southern California, the major trauma center here. And as they were taking me out of the ambulance, there's rain falling on my face, and it just felt amazing. I looked up at one of the guys and I said, it feels like I'm being baptized. And he looks back at me and says, brother, I think you've already been baptized. I spent about a week at Loma Linda, and had a parade of visitors, my family, friends, loved ones, and my brothers and sisters from patrol on the mountain. And they would come in with these horrible looks of just, fear and trepidation, like the most horrible thing imaginable had happened. And they would see me all lit up in this state of grace that I was in, a combination of spiritual epiphany and morphine sulfate, I confess. But I was getting better and stronger every day, and as my visitors would come, I'd tell them the story of what happened on the mountain, what's come to be known as the miracle on the mountain, and talked about the guys that had put their hands on me and the energy that transmitted through them to me. And I would see the change come over my visitors, that they would go from these, absolute fear and horror to just like wonder and acceptance and recognizing that something truly miraculous was taking place. And I recognized right then and there that the story had power. So I told it a lot. After about a week, the chief of neurosurgery and 15 of his residents all gathered around my bed in a horseshoe. And the chief looks at me and says, I'm recommending a 3-level spinal fusion to take the pressure off your spine. And I looked at him and I said, Doc, I know that if we were in different positions, if our positions were reversed, I'd be making the same suggestion to you. But I really see that something truly amazing is happening here, and I want to see what happens with my own recovery before I would consent to you guys cutting open my neck and stapling my spine together in 3 places. And he looked at me like he was offended, like I disrespected his expertise, and I saw the looks travel between his residents, and they all were kind of secretly pleased that I just told the Oracle of Delphi to go screw off. They left, and within an hour, a nurse, shoved a clipboard in my face and said, all right, if you're not going to consent to surgery, we need your bed. Which one of these hospitals do you want to go to? And it was a full page of hospital listings. I had no idea where to go. So I let Spirit light the way again, spun my finger around in the air, and dropped it on Daniel Freeman Memorial Hospital in Inglewood. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but Daniel Freeman had the second-rated spinal rehab unit in North America, second only to Johns Hopkins. They loaded me up in the ambulance. It was a 4-hour drive through a howling rainstorm to get there. And by the time I got there, my pain medication had worn off. I was in a world of screaming hurt. Nurse Gina came in and gave me a pain shot. They put me in the best room in the house. And I began 5 weeks of rehabilitation at Daniel Freeman. Now, during this time, I'm really deepening into this experience of what's happened and what it means in my life. And I was spending a lot of time praying and meditating. And my favorite place over there was about an acre-large garden with these giant banyan trees overhead, truly beautiful island of paradise in the middle of the hard streets of the city. And I was out there one morning with my friend Vicky. Now, Vicky and I have known each other for about 25 years at this point. She was one of my dear friends when we were teenagers. And her husband, Michael, had also been one of my best friends. And Michael had died 5 years earlier from melanoma. Let me go on record as saying that is one raging bitch of a disease. In the final year of his life, their timeless love just devolved into a horror show of pain and suffering and recrimination and hostility, anger. I mean, every negative human emotion you can name. And when Michael died, yeah, it was a tragedy, you know, one of my dear friends and, you know, just a guy in his 40s and in some ways a waste, but in some ways just a great relief to all of us. So we're sitting in the garden, and Vicky and I are under the banyans, and I tell her the story of the miracle on the mountain. And I'm getting to the part where I say, I know that there are angels in this world, and some of them wear red jackets with white crosses on them. And I know today that there are 6 angels that I can name, meaning the boys on the hill, Eddie, Chuck, Alex, Rick, Josh, and Scott. And shout out to you boys. Thank you. Here we are again. And just as those words left my lips, I had the feeling that someone else had joined the conversation. I looked at Vicky and said, and Vicky, there's one more angel, and it's Michael, and he's here. And for the next half hour or so, these things always seem to take about a half an hour, I had the experience for the first time of channeling a conversation between Vicky and her husband on the other side. What they said to each other is not important. That's between the two of them. But what they did get to do was really clear and heal all of that madness from the last year. They got to forgive themselves and forgive each other. They got to say, I love you one more time. About a half hour in, somebody flips the switch, and I snap back up and look at Vicky, and she's got makeup runs running down her face, and she looks at me and says, do you know what just happened? And I said, I do know, but I don't understand. I don't have a context for any of this, and, nothing like this has ever happened before. So, we said our goodbyes, and she went on her way, and I went back up to my room, and that night, just as I'm getting ready to go to bed, Michael shows up again in my room. And it's not an apparition like my dad on the mountain, but just this sensation, this awareness, this presence. And he tells me something very specific to tell his wife. And it was so specific, in fact, I thought maybe I was just crazy, which on any given day is a legit possibility. So I held on to it all the next day, didn't call Vicky until I was ready to go to bed the next night. Called her up, she gets on the phone. I said, Vicky, Michael came to see me again last night, and he wants me to tell you something. He wants me to tell you something very specific. What he said was he wants you to reread the letter that he wrote you when the two of you first found out that he was terminal, the one you keep in the box under the bed. Now, Vicky just lost it on the phone, and she says, oh, my God, I know exactly the letter you mean. I do keep it in a box under the bed. I have not been able to read that letter for years, but after what happened in the garden yesterday, I came home, and the first thing that I did was to take out that box and read that letter one more time. Now, this to me was like the universe saying, just in case you think this is a coincidence, pay attention. So I did. Next day I'm out in the garden again, and the sunlight is streaming through the banyan trees, and I hold my hands up to the light and say out loud, if it's possible for a group of guys to show up on a mountain somewhere and transmit this kind of healing energy to me, why couldn't I do that for someone else? And the voice in the garden, as it's come to be known, said, what makes you think you can't? And I just said, oh. And I turned my wheelchair around, went back inside, rode up the elevator to the second floor to the spinal unit, and there's Pat, my friend Pat, sitting on her little rascal scooter. Now, Pat is a 300-pound black Baptist woman. She was one of the first people I met when I came to the hospital, and I told her my story. And right after I told her my story, she just wrapped her arms around me in tears, and, you know, she's praying for me, and it was just a beautiful, like, being held by the earth itself. And so there's Pat, and I'm coming off the elevator in my wheelchair, and I say, Pat, come on, I need a witness. And the two of us wheel together into Macy's room. Now, Macy is an 85-year-old black Baptist woman. She is all alone at the hospital. Nobody ever comes to see her. She hasn't been able to walk for months. She's got bed sores up and down her body. She can't sleep. She won't eat. She keeps the nursing staff running all night with her suffering and her complaints. And they're right at the point in the program where they're about to flush her out of the program and send her off to a facility, or God's waiting room, as we call it. And let me just give you a picture of Macy's room. It's a double room. The lights are off in the front of the room, and the only light in there, which was always constant, was the little bedside lamp by her bed. And Macy is there, this tiny black woman, kind of shriveled up like a raisin on a marshmallow. And Pat and I wheel up on either side of the bed. And Macy's someone that I've got to know in my rounds when I go around and talk to people and share with them. And we've gotten to be friends. And I look at her and I say, Macy, I've been out in the garden again, and God told me that he was going to allow me to heal others by putting my hands on them. And she looks at me with those beautiful brown soulful eyes and says, oh, would you put your hands on me, please? And I said, yeah, that's what we're here for. And before I know it, we're kind of rolling up her nightgown. I said, whoa, wait a second. Let's not roll it up too far. I don't want to put my hands on too much. And Macy cracks up, and Pat cracks up, and we go to work. Now, I didn't have any technique or experience. I do have some of that now. So I just went with what the boys on the hill did for me. I prayed that Macy would be healed, that her healing would be a demonstration of God's love, compassion, and will for her in her life and in this world, and that she'd forever be a witness to that. And then being pretty good with words, I just sort of improvised from there. Pat, for her part, was a professional prayer, and she just filled the room with the most beautiful musical, just declarations of joy and devotion. And for about a half an hour, we filled that space with the divine light. After about a half hour, again, it was just like someone flipped a switch, and I'm back in the room sitting with two little old ladies, and I go, girls, it's been amazing, but I'm exhausted and I got to go to bed. So I did that, climbed into my bed, and went to sleep right away, and woke up the next morning, went to physical therapy. I'm wheeling out of physical therapy, and there's Pat sitting on her scooter. And we kind of wheel up together, and we're like debriefing about last night. And as we're kind of huddled up there, we both hear, there he is. And we turn and look down the hall. Here comes Macy walking down the hall for the first time in months, with her physical therapist just white as a sheet walking next to her. And he's like saying, oh my God, what did you say? What did you do? He said, I'm so glad I came to work this morning. And here comes Macy, walks right over to me, and we embrace, and she hugs Pat, and she says, isn't it a beautiful day? I get to take a walk with this handsome young man. And off they go, walking off down the hall together. The ribbon on that story is on the same day that I was released from the hospital to go home, Macy was released from the hospital to go home. Now, that was a real eye-opener for me and really, really started this journey. I went back to school. I got a bachelor's in psychology and then a master's in spiritual psychology, both degrees, by the way, taken side by side with my son, Adam. And that's really what started this journey. I've been through a succession of masters and teachers and picked up methods and techniques. Really, my criteria was the things that worked. and I saw immediate benefits to this kind of work. Now, I'm not a guy who discounts the value of Western medicine. As a ski patroller and EMT, I worked with those protocols all the time. So, my counsel is if you need a doctor, go see one. But there's plenty of ways to access these issues within ourselves. The physical manifestation of a disease or an illness or a trauma is always the tip of the iceberg. And what's underneath it is a world of the mental, the spiritual, the emotional, the familial, the karmic, the list goes on. And so I've learned to work within all of those levels and to activate people's awareness of how to access those levels within themselves. All of this work is guided by spirit. I don't take credit for anything that's happened or for anything that's in my book, and there's at least a dozen demonstration stories in the book besides the method itself. And so with that said, I throw the ball back to you, Daniel.
Well, that's certainly quite a ball. That's a wonderful story, and over the years as I've been broadcasting, and I've met wonderful individuals like yourself that seem to break through the paradigm of conditioning that says this is the way life is, that it's very linear. For instance, you take a look, whenever I've done interviews, let's say on building your own business, most titles would have you believe that business, when you go into business for yourself, is a linear process. You do point A, point B, or you take these steps and this should be the outcome, but any of us who've ever started our own businesses know that that's not the way it works. That's just
right.
not the way the world works. And it's funny because that particular kind of conditioning comes into us through whether it's our parents raising us or we're going to school and it says, this is the way you need to grow up, as an adult. And we live in a day and an age of such tremendous uncertainty that what your story certainly brings is a beacon of tremendous hope to realize we're not even scratching the surface of what each and every one of us are personally capable of.
So
and
true.
As you say, this method that you have been endowed with, let's just say, is one that you say it's easy to learn. You could probably learn about an hour or so, but it's just like any other thing that's worth doing. It takes a lifetime to even approach mastery. I mean, there's real work involved, and I think when somebody first hears about, this touch method that you're talking about, they'll say, well, I understand it's quick and easy, then how come I'm having a difficult time with it? Well, you've said it really eloquently through your story is this, because you got a lot of stuff in there that's getting in the way from you really mastering that, and that's where the real work begins.
Absolutely. When we first start doing this work, we find that we do a lot to achieve very little. As we begin to progress, we do less and less to achieve more and more. Finally, as we approach mastery, we find we achieve our most dramatic results by doing nothing at all. This is all in Spirit's hand. Can I read a few lines from the book?
Yes, we encourage you to.
Cool. This is on page 107 in a chapter called Beyond Space and Time. Yes, it is possible to analyze, deconstruct, devalue, and invalidate these experiences. Some of us live our entire lives doing this automatically, usually out of fear, unable to open ourselves to an expanded conception of what's really going on. This work, however, asks us not to do that. It asks us instead to continue opening ourselves to it, to offer ourselves as conduits for it, to learn to trust and rely on our intuition, our empathy, our natural knowing. It asks that we lift ourselves beyond the linear interpretation of reality, to embrace an expanded definition of ourselves. It asks us to live and work in the realm of what's possible, to accept that we are spiritually much greater than we pretend to be. Maybe we're a lot farther down this wormhole than we realize. As mathematical cosmologist Brian Swimme articulates, 14 billion years of evolution, and we're the latest models. Suppose we allow that we are interdimensional beings united by a living energy field that is both intelligent and compassionate. As beings, we are organized elemental expressions of that unified energy, microcosms of the totality, essentially connected to one another across countless expressions and emanations. We are in a constant state of interaction with these other expressions of ourselves, which exist simultaneously in alternate vibrational states. We sometimes call them ascended masters, angels, guides, or beings of light. These relationships exist along a spectrum that includes higher and lower frequencies, which could roughly be translated to mean higher and lower states of consciousness. Our current physical manifestation, the one that is defined by our point of view relative to our senses, resides somewhere along the spectrum of our total experience, neither at what we call the top or the bottom. It's probably inaccurate to perceive it in any sort of linear arrangement, since it's probably better expressed as a continuum. But all of those vibrational states affect us right here, right now. The mathematics for these interdependent relationships exist, we just haven't mastered them yet. Theoretical physics is lighting the way. In terms of the mind's influence over physical reality, our best science may still be like apes throwing bones at the sky. The perception that we are separate from each other, or from the source that animates us, is an illusion. We interact and influence each other at all levels, all the time. As we deepen in this work, as we relinquish our sense of control and simply allow, we learn to accept the improbable as routine and the impossible as just another opportunity for growth. This process is always revealing, always surprising, never boring. It will take you places you might never have imagined. It has most assuredly done that for me.
You know, you bring up something that I think is really interesting, and that is that we live in a day and an age that everybody seems to ride the wagon of science in such a way that it's almost, well, it's pretty much become its own force, if you will. And,
right.
You know, and I'm sure that you've faced a lot of skeptics and maybe even cynics that said, hey, you know, we've heard about this before. For some people it's worked, and for some people it was a disaster to even go that direction in the first place. How do you generally respond to people like that may kind of look at this and say, well, I don't know, this is nonsense, so there's no real scientific basis, so to speak?
Right. Well, let me begin by saying I count myself among the skeptics. I wouldn't go as far as to say I'm a cynic, but a skeptic for sure. I have a background in science, and I've studied quantum mechanics and quantum theory. We are living in a universe which is fundamentally intelligent. If you take two matched particles and shoot them across the opposite ends of a particle accelerator, which might be a universe apart in our conception of space and time, and we put a quality called spin on one of them, we can predict with 100% certainty the behavior of the other, that its quality of spin will match the spin of the other particle, as though a form of instantaneous intelligent communication is taking place between them. And so when we view time and space in our terms, in our limited three-dimensional reality, we're missing the point entirely. Stephen Hawking has postulated that there are at least 12 dimensions. Now that statement really fascinates me. Because we allow for three, and then we have this artificial construct, a fourth dimension called time. If we look at it in the spectrum of 12 dimensions, we're cutting ourselves off from a great deal of information, a great deal of ancient universal wisdom that has been here since the dawn of time. And so I can roll with the scientists, I can roll with the spiritualists. I've got an experience that, to me, is undeniable. And that is actually why I chose that particular passage. Because, yeah, it is possible to deconstruct and devalue and analyze and all of that. But this is really about an opening. This is really about personal elevation. This is really about our vibrational states. And that's the world that I've been living in for the last 16 years. If you had told me before 16 years ago that I would be in this line of work, I would have told you that you were crazy. If you had told me after those experiences that I wouldn't be in this line of work, I would have told you that you were crazy.
Either way, we're crazy, aren't we?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, I remember, in fact, just this year, not too long back, I recently interviewed with Don Miguel Ruiz Jr.
Oh,
I've also
yeah.
had the opportunity to also talk with his dad as well, Don Miguel Ruiz, and I know that you know who he is, and for the
I actually know him. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to say, it's interesting when you take a look at their work, which is based on the Pillar of the Four Agreements of the Toltec way, and you realize, just like what you're talking about here, this is easy, but you realize living those four agreements takes a heck of a lot of work. But as you were saying, at first it does, because you're changing a way that you were into something totally different, one that's more receptive, so forth and so on. Now, do you find that if people decide they want to come to you for healing, for whatever it may be, that, they might come and think to themselves, well, I don't know if this is going to work, but I hope it does.
Right. I do encounter that a lot. And invariably, people come to me with some manifestation of a physical issue, either chronic pain, illness, or trauma. And this is not an analytical process. It is very definitely a spiritual one. And I work through a variety of techniques and methods to bring us both into a state of presence. And we work with conscious breathing. We work with prayer. We work with light, sound, harmonic resonance, Qigong, Tai Chi, Kung Fu. The list goes on. But all of these methods do not contain the source, do not contain the answer. They're only stepping stones to get to the waterfall. Something happens in that process. And what happens is we come, maybe it's only for a moment, into a state of presence, into a state of acceptance. And when that happens, Spirit does all the work. All we've done is show up for the meeting. And I've seen what we might call miraculous things take place with people that have been suffering for years or decades with a variety of conditions. I've had people that were told, women that were told that they would never bear children, who are now mothers. One of those stories is in my book. And so I'm totally convinced of the reality and efficacy and power of this work. I encourage our listeners to look within themselves. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said throughout humanity's presence here on Earth. Some of the techniques I'm working with go back 5,000 years and yet relate directly to our modern quantum age experience. We have an opportunity in this time to work together, to unify ourselves as a species, to heal ourselves, to heal one another, and to heal this planet. And that's where I live right now. I live right in that ballpark. And so I encourage our listeners to tune into themselves and tune into us and practice this work. Pick up the book. It's the best $16 you're going to spend. The techniques that I use are all laid out in there. It's very easy to follow. And I do, of course, teach these methods in my workshop, which is known as Awaken Your Inner Healer. We're scheduled for a tour to the Bay Area coming up in the fall through East West Bookshop, which is one of the preeminent centers of spirituality in North America. And it's really kind of a big deal and a wonderful invitation. I can't wait to get up there. And there will be other events and workshops announced in the coming weeks. We're just kind of finalizing our schedule and booking our venues and doing all of that right now. So yeah, you can get in touch with me directly. I'm always open. I'm on a 24/7 time clock. And I can be reached through my website, which is www.DougHayesHealing.com. And Hayes, by the way, is spelled H-E-Y-E-S. DougHayesHealing.com.
Well, very good. I know that you've given our listeners quite a bit to chew on here. The first thing is taking that step to discover for yourself what this experience is, and then trusting that what's possible is very possible. I mean, you go way back, as you were saying, you don't really consider yourself to have a particular religion that you buy into or practice, and I was much like you years ago. I just loved studying religion, kind of finding, well, what's the best in each of these things that are presented to us to find our way to God, and eventually you start getting the same message that, just like in The Wizard of Oz, well, it's been inside you the whole time. Well,
right,
geez,
exactly.
What am I looking out here for? And it's, well, there's an interesting Indian word that is called, I'm trying to remember, Lila, I believe, which is where they believe God likes to play hide-and-go-seek with himself. And the best place that he does that is by reciting within you, because knowing that you're going to search everywhere else but inside. And I'll bet when people really open up, or they have an experience when they come and see you, perhaps for the first time or the second time, or they learn this, I'll bet their own capacity for miracles just probably astounds them, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I've done thousands of these sessions now, and I just want to respond to something that you said. We tend to put the bar way out in front of us and visualize that there are all of these obstacles in our way. And only when I get this handled, only when I find her, only when I find him, only when I get my work in order, only when I get my finances in order, only when I get my back taxes paid, whatever it happens to be, we keep continually putting these barriers in front of ourselves and moving the finish line farther and farther away. My response to that is look within yourself. It's here. It's always been here. It's always been here. You are a divine expression, a divine emanation. You are created, as the Bible tells us, in the image and likeness of God. Tap into your true power. Tap into your source. This has been with you all your life and will be forever with you. You'll go through your own process to find your way, but where you're going to find your way back to is to where it all began, to right here, right now, within your heart, within your spirit, within your love, within your soul. Now more than ever. Oh, my God, now more than ever.
Absolutely. I want to thank you, Doug, for joining us here on the program today. And for our listeners, if you could, go ahead and give out that website one more time.
Sure. It's www.doughayeshealing.com. My personal number is on there, and any of our listeners are welcome to call me anytime. I do pick up the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning Pacific time if necessary. And this work, by the way, can be done in person. It can be done over the phone. It can be done at a distance or by remote. I've had some of the most amazing demonstrations with people that I've never met 3,000 miles away. So I encourage our listeners to simply reach out, and I will be here.
Well, very good, Doug. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. I feel the touch.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for a weekly e-newsletter so you can stay updated on what's going on in the world of Beyond 50. You can also follow us on Facebook as well as Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.